You see, in all my years, I've learned that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones we tell others, they're the ones we tell ourselves. Every parent who walks onto my stage believes they know their child, but what they really know is the version of that child they've constructed in their own minds, a version that fits their narrative, that validates their choices. They know the child they need to see. And when the real child, the one who's been living in the shadows, finally steps into the light, it can shatter a family's entire foundation. That's what happened with Carol and her daughter, Ashley. When I first reviewed their case file, it read like 100 others. Carol, a single mother in her late 40s, wrote a desperate, tear-stained letter. She described herself as a devoted, loving mother who had sacrificed everything for her 17-year-old daughter. And Ashley, well, Ashley was the monster. That's the word Carol used. My sweet girl has turned into a monster. The file was a laundry list of teenage rebellion cliches. Sneaking out, failing grades, a new bad influence group of friends. But the real crisis, the reason she was writing to me, was the stealing. It started small, a $20 bill from her purse. Then it became hundreds, jewelry, heirlooms, things with sentimental value were disappearing. Carol was convinced it was for drugs, for some boy, for a life she couldn't even bear to imagine. She saw her daughter spiraling, and her narrative was clear. I am the victim. She is the villain. Save my daughter from herself, Dr. Phil. Fix her. I've learned to be skeptical of such clean-cut narratives. Life isn't a movie with good guys and bad guys. It's a complex, messy system of actions and reactions, of needs met and unmet. When Carol and Ashley came backstage, the dynamic was exactly as I'd pictured, yet profoundly different. Carol was wound tight, a bundle of nervous energy and righteous indignation. She talked a mile a minute, her hands fluttering, constantly adjusting her clothes as if trying to physically hold herself together. Her story was polished, rehearsed. She had her talking points down, every sacrifice she'd ever made, every sleepless night she'd endured, every tear she'd cried. She was performing the role of the perfect, long-suffering mother. And Ashley was a ghost. She was physically present, of course, sitting slumped in a chair across the room, but her spirit was somewhere else entirely. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of more than just a few late nights. Her eyes were vacant. When her mother spoke, she didn't react. Not with anger, not with defiance, not even with a flicker of annoyance. There was just nothing. It was a complete and total shutdown. That's a defense mechanism, and it's one of the most powerful ones I see. When you can't fight and you can't flee, you freeze. You emotionally check out. You build a fortress inside yourself where no one can reach you. A child doesn't build a fortress like that unless they feel like they're living in a war zone. I sat with them separately before the show. With Carol, it was like listening to a prosecutor make a closing argument. The evidence was presented, the verdict already decided. I gave her everything she said, her voice cracking with self-pity. I worked 2 jobs to keep her in the best schools. I never dated, never put a man before her. My entire life has been about Ashley. And this is how she repays me, by stealing from me, by throwing her future away. I listened. I nodded. But what I was hearing wasn't just a story about a rebellious teenager. I was hearing the story of a woman whose entire identity was invested in her daughter's success and compliance. Ashley wasn't just her daughter. She was her life's project, the validation of her sacrifices. And that project was failing, which meant in her mind that she was failing. When I sat with Ashley, It was like talking to a stone wall. I asked her simple questions. How are you feeling about being here? A shrug. What do you want me to know about your mom? A shake of the head. Tell me what's going on, Ashley. Silence. She just stared at a spot on the floor, her arms crossed tight against her chest. But I wasn't looking for answers from her words. I was looking for them in her posture, in her breathing, in the tension, in her jaw. This wasn't the look of a defiant kid who was getting a thrill from breaking the rules. This was the look of someone carrying an immense weight. Defiance is loud, it's arrogant. This was heavy. It was exhaustion. It was sorrow. The labels were all wrong. Carol wasn't just a victim, she was unintentionally a warden. And Ashley wasn't a monster, she was a prisoner. The problem wasn't what Ashley was doing, the problem was why. And that's the question that hung in the air as we prepared to walk out onto that stage. Carol thought she was there for me to fix her daughter. I knew, without a doubt, that we were there to dismantle the entire illusion she had built her life upon. The moment the lights hit you on that stage, the dynamic changes. It's an amplifier. Every emotion, every bit of tension, every unspoken resentment gets turned up to a 10. For Carol, the stage was a platform, a place to finally have her story heard by the world. You could see her straighten up, her voice gaining a new, more theatrical quality. She was no longer just a worried mother. She was the star of her own tragedy, and she was playing the part beautifully. She laid out her case against Ashley with the precision of a seasoned attorney. She talked about working double shifts as a nurse to afford Ashley's dance lessons, her art classes, the nice clothes she wore. She talked about selling her own mother's ring to pay for a school trip to Europe. Each sacrifice was a brick in the wall of her righteousness, and with each brick, she walled her daughter out. Ashley, on the other hand, seemed to shrink. The lights, the audience, her mother's booming voice, it all seemed to press down on her, making her fold in on herself even more. She sat there, a tiny island of silence in a sea of her mother's grievances. My first job wasn't to talk to Ashley, it was to disarm Carol. Not to attack her, but to gently dismantle the narrative she was using as both a sword and a shield. Carol, I started keeping my voice calm, and even I hear everything you're saying. I don't doubt for 1 second that you love your daughter and that you have worked your fingers to the bone for her. Nobody's questioning your sacrifice. But I want to ask you something. When you did all those things, the double shifts, selling the ring, what did you expect in return? She was taken aback. It was a question she hadn't prepared for. Well, what do you mean? I didn't expect anything. I did it because I'm her mother. That's what mothers do. I know it is, I said, but we're all human, Carol. And when we give, a part of us expects something back. Maybe not money, maybe not even a thank you, but maybe we expect appreciation, or maybe we expect that child to take all those opportunities and become something specific. A successful artist, a straight A student, a girl who makes her mother proud. Did you have a picture in your mind of who Ashley was supposed to become as a result of all your sacrifices? The studio was silent. Carol blinked, her carefully constructed monologue momentarily forgotten. That's the first crack. You introduce a new idea, a different way of looking at the same set of facts. She was so focused on what Ashley wasn't doing that she'd never stopped to consider the crushing weight of her own expectations. She'd created what I call a covert contract. She'd given and given and given, and in her mind, Ashley's part of the deal was to be perfect. The problem is, Ashley never signed that contract. She never even knew it existed. She was just a kid, and all she felt was the mounting debt she could never possibly repay. I turned to Ashley. Her eyes were still fixed on the floor. "Ashley," I said softly, "I want you to look at me." Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her head. It was the first real sign of engagement I'd seen from her. "I want to talk about you, not about the stealing, not about the grades. Who are you? What did you love to do when you were 10 years old?" For the first time, a flicker of something crossed her face. Confusion, maybe a ghost of a memory. Her voice was barely a whisper. I like to build things with Legos, and I like to draw comics, silly cartoons. "Did your mom like your cartoons?" I asked. She shook her head. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. She said it was a waste of time, that my art classes were for learning real art, for scholarships. And the dance lessons? I pressed. "I hated them," she whispered, the words tumbling out like they'd been held back by a dam. "My feet always hurt. I wasn't any good. But Mom, she had my recital photos all over her office." She loved telling everyone her daughter was a dancer. And there it was, the beginning of the story. This wasn't a recent rebellion. This was a lifetime of quiet suffocation. Ashley's entire childhood wasn't about her exploring who she was. It was about her performing the role of the daughter Carol needed her to be. The dancer, the artist, the straight-A student. Every activity, every choice was an investment her mother was making, and the pressure to provide a return on that investment was immense. A child's spirit can't survive that. It has to find an escape. For years, her escape was to shut down, to comply, to be the ghost in her own life. But a teenager's spirit is different. It starts to push back. It has to. It's a matter of survival. The sneaking out, the failing grades, even the stealing, these weren't the actions of a monster. They were the desperate, clumsy, and self-destructive actions of a prisoner trying to tunnel her way out of a cell she didn't even know how to describe. She wasn't stealing money from her mother. She was trying to steal back a piece of her own life, the only way she knew how. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. Carol looked like I had just slapped her. Her face, which had been a mask of righteous sorrow, was now flushed with indignation. "That's not true," she said, her voice sharp, defensive. "She loved dancing. Everyone said she was so graceful. Her teacher said she had potential. She's just rewriting history to make me look bad. This is what she does. She twists things." This is a classic move. It's called blameshifting and gaslighting. When the truth becomes too uncomfortable, you invalidate the other person's reality. You paint them as confused or malicious, or in this case, a liar. It's a way to protect your own narrative. I held up a hand, not to silence her, but to slow her down. "Hold on, Carol. I'm not saying you're a bad mother. I'm saying you might be a blind one. There's a huge difference. You were so focused on the image of a successful daughter, the performance of happiness, that you missed the actual child sitting right in front of you. You saw the recital photos, but you didn't see the pain in her feet. You saw the A on the art project, but you didn't see the joyless, mechanical way she was painting by numbers instead of from her heart." I turned back to Ashley. She was watching her mother, and for the first time, there wasn't emptiness in her eyes. There was a flicker of something else. Anger, sadness, it was a start. "Ashley," I said, my voice firm but gentle, "this behavior, the stealing, it didn't just start last month, did it? This has been building, the pressure has been building. Tell me what happened that made it escalate. What was the tipping point?" She took a shaky breath. "School," she said. "College applications, Mom had it all planned out. A portfolio for a big art school back east. She'd already paid the application fees. She was talking to admissions people, telling them I was the next Georgia O'Keeffe. And I couldn't. You couldn't? Or you wouldn't? I asked. Both, she whispered. I started failing my art class on purpose, turning in bad work, forgetting assignments. I thought if they saw I wasn't good enough, she'd have to let it go. Carol gasped, horrified. You did that on purpose? You sabotaged your own future, your own scholarship opportunities just to spite me? It wasn't to spite you. Ashley's voice rose, cracking with a frustration that had been dormant for years. It was to save me. I don't want to be Georgia O'Keeffe. I just want to be Ashley. Don't you get it? It was never about me. This is the explosion that happens when a slow leak of pressure finally meets a spark. For 17 years, Ashley had swallowed her feelings, her desires, her own identity. Now, it was all coming out. The problem is, it was coming out in destructive ways. Failing classes was an act of rebellion. Sneaking out was an act of rebellion. But it was all indirect. She was attacking her mother's dream, not building her own. So let's get to the heart of it, I said, looking straight at Ashley. The stealing. Your mother is sitting here terrified. She thinks you're on drugs. She thinks you've fallen in with a criminal crowd. She has imagined the worst possible scenarios because she's scared. I need you to tell me, right here, right now, the truth. Where did the money go? Ashley looked from me to her mother. Her jaw was set. The frightened ghost was gone. And in her place was a young woman who had finally reached her breaking point. I didn't buy drugs, she said, her voice clear and cold. I didn't give it to a boy. I used it to live. Carol scoffed. To live? I give you a beautiful home. I put food on the table. I buy you clothes. That's not living, Mom. That's existing in your museum, Ashley shot back. I rented a storage locker across town. I used the money to buy cheap art supplies, canvases and markers and ink. I bought a used graphics tablet. I spent hours in the library teaching myself digital animation, the stuff I wanted to do. I bought bus passes and I'd just ride around the city. I'd sit in coffee shops and I'd draw for hours. I'd buy myself lunch. That's where the money went. It went to a life you never knew I had. A life where I got to be me for maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. She then dropped the final bomb, and I sold the ring to buy a bus ticket. A one-way ticket to Portland. I was saving it for my 18th birthday. I was going to leave. The air went out of Carol's lungs. This was a truth far more painful than drugs or crime. Drugs would have made Ashley a victim of an external force. This made Carol the reason. The thing to be escaped. The stealing wasn't an act of disrespect against her. It was an act of survival for Ashley. The ultimate betrayal wasn't the loss of the money or the heirlooms. It was the discovery of this secret parallel life, a life built entirely around the premise of getting away from her. The conflict had escalated from a mother's concern over a troubled teen to a fundamental breakdown of their entire reality. The fight that must have happened when Carol found that locker key or that bus ticket must have been the final cataclysm that brought them here. It was no longer about fixing a broken child. It was about facing a broken relationship. That moment on stage is what I call the point of impact. It's when the carefully constructed narratives collide with the unvarnished truth and the fallout is immediate and raw. Carol's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, denial, a flash of anger, and then finally a deep, bone-weary pain. It was the look of a person whose entire world had just been turned inside out. Everything she thought was an act of love, her daughter had experienced as an act of control. Every sacrifice she thought she was making for Ashley, Ashley had interpreted as a debt being placed on her. A bus ticket? Carol's voice was a whisper, stripped of all its earlier bravado. You were just going to disappear without a word? What word was there to say? Ashley's voice was still raw, but the anger was subsiding, replaced by a profound sadness. Anything I ever said that wasn't what you wanted to hear, you told me I was being ungrateful, that I was being dramatic. You didn't listen. You never listened. You just told me who I was and what I wanted. Now, this is the critical juncture. This is where a family either breaks apart for good or they find a new way to begin. My role in this moment is to not let them retreat back into their old corners of victim and villain. The instinct is to assign blame. Carol's instinct is to say, how could you be so cruel? Ashley's instinct is to say, you drove me to this. But blame is a dead end. It solves nothing. It just keeps the cycle of pain spinning, all right? I said, stepping into the space between them. We're going to stop right here. Because right now, you're both talking at each other. Carol, you're hearing that your daughter was planning to abandon you. Ashley, you're trying to make your mother understand years of silent frustration. Let's take a breath. I turned to Carol directly. Carol, I need you to hear me. This isn't about you. I know that sounds crazy because you're the one who was stolen from, you're the one who was lied to, but her actions, as misguided and hurtful as they were not designed to destroy you. They were designed to save herself. A child who feels heard, who feels seen, who feels accepted for who they are, not for who you want them to be, doesn't build a secret life in a storage locker. They don't plan an escape. They might argue with you, they might push boundaries, but they don't plot to vanish. Your daughter felt like she was drowning, and you were so busy teaching her how to swim in a style you liked that you didn't notice she was going under. Tears were now streaming down Carol's face, silent and heavy. The armor was gone. She wasn't the righteous victim anymore. She was just a mom who had gotten it terribly, terribly wrong. And Ashley, I said, turning to her, I get it. You felt you had no choice. You were suffocating. But you have to own your part in this. You chose deception over dialogue. You chose stealing over speaking your truth. Now, I hear you when you say she wouldn't listen, and from what I'm seeing, you're probably right. But you're 17 years old. You're on the cusp of being an adult. Part of being an adult is learning to advocate for yourself in a way that is direct and honest, not passive-aggressive and destructive. Running away, whether it's to a storage locker or to Portland, isn't a solution, it's an escape. You can't run away from yourself. Eventually, you have to stand your ground and learn to speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. What you did hurt your mother deeply. It broke her trust. That's real. And you have to be accountable for that. This is the hardest part for guests to accept, that there are no pure victims. Everyone plays a role in the dysfunction. Ashley's choices were a reaction to her mother's pressure, yes, but they were still her choices. Holding her accountable wasn't about blaming her, it was about empowering her. It was about telling her that she has more tools at her disposal than just lies and theft. Then came the question, the one I had been waiting to ask since I first read the file. I looked right at Carol, past the tears, past the pain, and I asked it with all the quiet intensity I could muster. Carol, forget the dancer, forget the artist, forget the straight A student. If you take all of that away, who is your daughter? Right now, sitting in that chair, who is she? Carol stared at Ashley as if seeing her for the first time. The silence in the studio was absolute. You could feel every person in that audience holding their breath, waiting. Carol opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at her hands, then back up at the pale, tear-streaked face of her child. And she said the three most honest words I had heard from her all day: I don't know. That was the breakthrough. Not a screaming match, not a dramatic confession, but a quiet, devastating admission of ignorance, the admission that she had been mothering an idea, a phantom, a projection of her own needs and insecurities, while the real child was a stranger living under her own roof. It was a moment of complete and utter ego death. It was the end of the story she had been telling herself for 17 years, and it was the only possible beginning for a new one. That admission, I don't know, is a terrifying place for a parent to be. It's an abyss. For 17 years, Carol's identity had been inextricably linked to being Ashley's mother, a role she thought she knew inside and out. She had the script memorized, the costume perfected. Now, in front of millions of people, she had just confessed that she didn't even know her co-star. The pain of that realization is immense, but it's also where the healing has to start. You can't fix a problem until you admit it exists. And the problem here wasn't a rebellious teenager. It was a relationship built on a foundation of profound misunderstanding. I let that silence hang in the air for a moment. It was a sacred silence, filled with the weight of years of unspoken truths. Then I turned to Ashley. Ashley, did you hear that? Your mother just gave you the biggest gift she could possibly give you right now. She gave you honesty. She admitted she doesn't know you, which means she's finally ready to meet you, the real you. The question is, are you ready to let her in? Ashley looked at her mother, and for the first time, there was no wall between them. The anger was gone. The defiance had melted away. All that was left was a young girl who looked deeply, deeply tired. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I think so, she whispered. I'm tired of hiding. Of course you are, I said. It's exhausting living a double life. It takes more energy to maintain a lie than it ever does to live the truth. Now, this is the point where television often wants a big, tearful hug and a promise that everything will be perfect, but that's not real life. Real life is messy, and rebuilding trust is a slow, painstaking process. They didn't need a hug right then. They needed a plan. They needed tools. Their old way of communicating was broken beyond repair. They needed to learn an entirely new language. Okay, I said shifting from confrontation to construction. So here's what's going to happen. The old contract is torn up, the one where Carol sacrifices and Ashley performs. It's null and void. We're going to write a new one. Carol, your job is no longer to manage your daughter's life. Your job is to be a loving, supportive safety net as she learns to manage it herself. That means you have to learn to ask questions instead of giving directions. Questions like, what are you passionate about? What are you afraid of? How can I support you? And then you have to do the hardest part. You have to shut up and listen to the answer, even if you don't like it. I looked at her pointedly. She might tell you she wants to be an animator who draws silly cartoons. She might tell you she wants to take a year off and work in a coffee shop to figure things out. It's her life to design, not yours. Your approval is not the goal. Her authenticity is. Can you do that? Carol nodded, wiping her eyes. I can try, she said, her voice shaky but sincere. I want to know my daughter. Good, I said. And Ashley, your job is to use your words. You have a voice. I've heard it today. It's powerful. You need to learn to use it before a crisis, not during one. When you feel that pressure building, when you feel like your mother is pushing you in a direction you don't want to go, You have a responsibility to say, Mom, I need to talk to you. This isn't working for me. This isn't who I am. No more secrets, no more stealing, no more plotting escapes. You have to be willing to have the hard conversations. And you have to start making restitution for the trust you broke. That doesn't just mean paying back the money. It means showing up, being honest, and being reliable, day in and day out. It means earning that trust back one honest conversation at a time. I paused, letting it all sink in. This wasn't a quick fix. This was a complete overhaul of their entire relational dynamic. It was going to be hard work. There would be setbacks. They would fall into old patterns. But for the first time, they both had a clear view of what the real problem was. The presenting problem was the stealing, but the core issue was a crisis of identity, both of theirs. Ashley was fighting to have one, and Carol was terrified of losing hers. The outcome for a story like this is never a neat bow. You don't walk off the stage and into a sunset. The outcome is a beginning. It's a commitment to do the work. I arranged for them to see a family therapist in their hometown, someone who could help them navigate the difficult conversations ahead. I gave Carol resources for parents of young adults, books and support groups to help her redefine her own life and identity outside of being Ashley's mom. For Ashley, we found a local community college with a great digital arts program, a place where she could explore her passion on her own terms without the pressure of a prestigious, mother-approved art school. The bus ticket to Portland was ripped up, not because Carol forbade it, but because Ashley chose to. The escape was no longer necessary. Running away is about getting away from something you can't face. When you finally turn and face it, the need to run often disappears. She wasn't staying for her mother, she was staying for herself, to see if it was possible to build an authentic life right where she was. I followed up with them, of course. I always do. The calls in the weeks and months after a show are often more telling than what happens under the studio lights. The first few weeks were rocky, just as I expected. They described it as walking on eggshells around each other. Carol would bite her tongue, wanting to ask about homework or future plans, and Ashley would clam up, assuming any question was a veiled command. Their old dance was so ingrained that it took a conscious, exhausting effort to learn new steps. Carol told me about a moment a month after the show that nearly broke them. Ashley had come home with her hair dyed bright blue. Carol's first visceral reaction was horror. All she could see was a job interview nightmare, a symbol of rebellion, a slap in the face. The old Carol would have exploded. She would have yelled about how much money she'd spent on Ashley's beautiful blonde hair over the years, how unprofessional it looked, how this was just another act of defiance. She told me she stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the counter, and she could feel the angry words rising in her throat. But then she remembered what I'd said. Ask questions. Shut up and listen. She took a deep breath, and instead of the lecture she wanted to give, she said, "Wow, that's really blue. Tell me about it." Ashley, who had been braced for a fight, was visibly stunned. Hesitantly, she explained that she'd done it herself with a friend, that she'd always wanted to try a crazy color, that it made her feel more like the character she drew in her comics. It made her feel like herself. Carol told me that in that moment, she didn't see the unprofessional hair of a future failure. She saw her daughter's face light up as she talked about it. She saw a spark of joy and self-expression that had been missing for years. And she realized that the hair wasn't about her at all. It was about Ashley. And her job wasn't to approve or disapprove of the hair. It was to love the girl who wore it. She simply said, Well, I'm glad it makes you happy. It was a revolutionary act for her, a small moment that represented a monumental shift. She was learning to separate her daughter's identity from her own. For Ashley, the work was different. It was about building trust and taking responsibility. She got a part-time job at a local diner. Every week, without fail, she gave a portion of her paycheck to her mother. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the principle. It was a tangible symbol of her commitment to making things right. But more than that, she started talking. She would show her mom a cartoon she drew or talk about a frustrating customer at work. They were small, mundane conversations, but they were the building blocks of a real relationship. They weren't talking about grades or college or the future. They were just talking, connecting as two people. There was no magical overnight transformation. Ashley didn't suddenly become a perfect daughter, and Carol didn't become a perfectly enlightened parent. There were still arguments. There were still moments of misunderstanding, but the fundamental dynamic had changed. They were no longer operating from a place of secrets and expectations. Their new foundation was a fragile, hard-won honesty. The last time I spoke with Carol, about a year after their appearance, she sounded like a different woman. The frantic, high-strung energy was gone. Her voice was calmer, more grounded. She told me Ashley was enrolled in the community college's animation program and was loving it. She was getting good grades, not because her mom was breathing down her neck, but because she was finally studying something she cared about. She still had blue hair. Carol laughed when she told me that. I've gotten used to it, she said. It's who she is. But the most important thing she told me was about herself. She had joined a book club. She was taking a pottery class. She was even going out on dates. I spent so many years thinking my whole job was to build Ashley's life, she said. It never occurred to me that I was supposed to have one of my own. I'm getting to know myself, Dr. Phil, just like I'm getting to know my daughter. And that, right there, is the real outcome. It's not just about a mother and daughter learning to get along. It's about two individuals finding their own authentic paths and then discovering that those paths can run alongside each other in a healthy, supportive way rather than being tangled up in a knot of resentment and obligation. Ashley didn't have to run away to find herself, and Carol didn't have to cling so tightly for fear of being abandoned. They both just had to let go. They had to let go of the fantasy daughter and the martyr mother, and in the empty space that was left, they finally found each other. They didn't get the ending they expected, but they got the beginning they so desperately needed. Years go by. You do 1,000 shows, you talk to thousands of guests, and some stories, they just fade into the background. They become part of the larger tapestry of human struggle you witness every day. But some, like Carol and Ashley's, stick with you. Not because they were the most dramatic or the most explosive, but because they were so fundamentally human. Their story was a quiet, powerful testament to the fact that it's never too late to change the narrative. It's never too late to stop reading from a script someone else wrote for you and start writing your own. I've often said that the number one rule in my work is that you can't change what you don't acknowledge. For 17 years, Carol and Ashley were living in a state of mutual denial. Carol denied that her love had become a form of control, and Ashley denied her own voice, choosing to express her rebellion through destructive silence rather than constructive words. Their entire relationship was a lie they had both tacitly agreed to live. Carol got to be the perfect, sacrificing mother, and Ashley got to avoid the terrifying conflict of speaking her truth. It was a dysfunctional but stable system. The stealing was what finally broke that system. It was a symptom, a cry for help so loud it could no longer be ignored. What I find most compelling, looking back, is the anatomy of Carol's blindness. It wasn't born of malice. I've met malicious parents, and she was not one of them. Her blindness was born of fear. Fear that she hadn't done enough. Fear that she would be judged as a single mother. Fear that her daughter would not have the perfect, successful life that would validate all of Carol's sacrifices. Her love for her daughter became so intertwined with her own need for validation that she couldn't see where one ended and the other began. Ashley wasn't a person, she was a project. She was Carol's magnum opus. And when the project started to show cracks and flaws, Carol's response wasn't to ask the project what it needed, but to try and patch the cracks with more pressure, more expectations, more control. And Ashley's journey is a cautionary tale about the corrosive nature of unspoken resentment. Every yes she said to something she hated, every smile she faked at a recital, every compliment she accepted for a piece of art she felt no connection to was a small betrayal of her own soul. That resentment built up inside her like a poison until it had to come out. And because she had no healthy outlet for it, it came out sideways in lies, in theft, in a secret plan to run away. She was a classic example of a passive-aggressive personality in the making. She couldn't say no to her mother's face, so she said it with her actions. It's an incredibly disempowering way to live. It keeps you in a perpetual state of victimhood, where things are always happening to you, and your only recourse is to sabotage and deceive. The breakthrough on that stage was not just about Carol's admission, it was about Ashley realizing that she had the power to speak her truth directly. It was about her trading the fleeting power of a secret for the authentic power of her own voice. That's a terrifying leap for a kid who has spent her whole life being a people pleaser. It's easier to steal a $20 bill than it is to look your mother in the eye and say, "I hate dancing. I don't want to do this anymore." The first is a crime of cowardice. The second is an act of courage. The outcome, that fragile piece they built, was only possible because they both took accountability. That's the magic ingredient. Carol had to be accountable for her suffocating expectations. Ashley had to be accountable for her deceitful and hurtful actions. Without that mutual accountability, they would have just left the stage and gone right back to their corners, more entrenched in their victimhood than ever before. Thinking about them now, years later, I don't picture them as that broken pair on my stage. I picture Carol in her pottery class, her hands covered in clay, creating something just for herself, for the joy of it, with no expectation of it winning a prize or validating her existence. And I picture Ashley, maybe with pink hair now, or green, sitting in front of a computer, bringing one of her silly, wonderful cartoons to life, not for a scholarship or for her mother's approval, but for the pure, unadulterated love of creating. Their story is a reminder that the most profound change doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from small, daily acts of courage. The courage to ask a question instead of making an assumption. The courage to speak a difficult truth instead of telling a convenient lie. The courage to admit, "I don't know," and be willing to learn. That's not just how you fix a broken family, that's how you build an authentic life. They didn't just save their relationship, they saved themselves from the very roles they thought they had to play. And that is a powerful, powerful thing.